Y'all know I got to get this stuff together, but it's okay. This is for the regular people. This is Dr. Faye Williams. She is the president of the National Congress of Black Women.
That's right.
Real quick, for us people who are down here on the street level, please tell us what is that and what does it do?
Well, the National Congress of Black Women was founded by Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm and Dr. C. Dolores Tucker. Those are my two predecessors, and I've been following in their footsteps. We work for the benefit of Black women and their families. That includes their spouses, their sons, their nephews. In other words, we don't discriminate against anyone in our community. Every year we honor women for the things they're doing in our communities, but we also honor what we call good brothers. And Dick Gregory has been one of our good brothers that we honored some years ago. We always honor people who are promoting positive things in our community. Let's say, for example, we do things to help people through, say, problems they have with flooding in their community. Let's say if they lose their home or they're going to be out of it for a while. We provide clothing for the family. We will provide small, utility things like microwaves and little stoves and little refrigerators or whatever we can. We've even provided toys for children because, generally when a community is flooded, the children have to leave their toys behind. So we kind of try to think of everything. We provide for young women who can't buy diapers for their babies. That's something we are willing to help them with. And we have chapters all across the country. We are with our national headquarters in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
But we have chapters in most of the major cities in the country: Los Angeles, Houston, Baton Rouge, Washington, D.C., Richmond, Virginia, and many other places.
And these are your physical locations. You tell me you have a media location. You have a radio show, you was telling me
Yes.
as well. You do a radio show, say it comes on 10 a.m. Tell us a little bit about your radio station and what is it dedicated to?
Okay, and by the way, that is 10 a.m. Eastern. Dick Gregory was on the board of directors of a station called WPF WFM 89.3, which is streamed all over the world. And also working with him on that was Marion Barry, the former mayor of Washington, D.C. They were good friends. So they were both on the board. And when Mr. Gregory made his transition, the station called and asked if I would do a program. And so I said yes, so long as I could do it in remembrance of Dick Gregory. And they agreed immediately with it. And since the last words I'd heard him say before he transitioned, they were Wake Up and Stay Woke, I decided to name my program Wake Up and Stay Woke, and the station manager agreed with that. So I've been doing that now for about 2 years, and everybody who comes on my show is asked the question, did you know Dick Gregory, or do you remember anything he said or did? Everybody remembers something he said or something he did. Many of them remember him as a nutritionist. They would call him about their health care. Many of them remember him as a comic. Many of them remember him as a peace and human rights activist. So, and certainly the Native American community remembers him for helping them with their fishing rights. So just about everybody knew him for one reason or another.
Okay, so Ms. Williams, so the title of your book you chose, Wake Up and Stay Woke. Why did you choose those words?
Well, that was an easy one. First of all, they were the last words I heard him say on the Saturday that he left us. On that day he was preparing to go home. Actually, he had gotten up and they'd taken him outside the hospital for a walk, and he was scheduled to go home. In the afternoon, Mrs. Gregory and one of the daughters, some of the daughters were already there, but one of the daughters arrived, and we left the room to give them some privacy. But before doing so, Mr. Gregory had had phone calls from Dale Brown, the coach at Louisiana State University, where Mr. Gregory's daughter had attended school. And also there was, let's see, who else there? We were just sort of sitting around Keith Silver. I don't know if you know Keith Silver, but he was a good friend to SCLC and was once actively involved. And a lot of other friends had come to the hospital to visit with Mr. Gregory. It's almost as though they knew he wasn't going to be with us very long. I didn't, because I was always hopeful. And they were sitting in the room. Minister Farrakhan called that morning. Jesse Jackson called that morning. Lots of friends called. Again, it's like almost like they knew that he was about to leave us. But when Mrs. Gregory arrived, we all left the room and we allowed the family to be alone with them after the doctor had indicated that they were going to need to take him to George Washington Hospital for surgery. They took him downstairs and we cleaned out the room. And of course, before he made it to the transport vehicle with his son, Dr. Christian Gregory, he passed away. He left us.
Yeah.
And I had just barely gotten home when I got a call from his son, Gregory, who said, my dad has made his transition. Well, of course, I couldn't believe it. And almost immediately, it went out on the news across the world that he had made his transition. And people were calling me from all over the world, asking me if it were true, because to most of us, Mr. Gregory was never supposed to die.
Yeah, how is he leaving?
We just thought that he would be here always.
Always, yes.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so this isn't a book. This isn't a bio or outside sketch about Dick Gregory. This is a personal, from the heart look at him.
Yeah, so I've been asked what makes my book different from what other people have written about him, and I say, well, one of the things that distinguishes it is that many of the people, not all, but many of the people who wrote about him researched him and just kind of said what somebody else said. My writing has to do with personal experiences with him and things he told me.
Okay. Could you share with us, now you gave me a little backstory about y'all had, or share with our viewers about you would roll up on protesters and y'all had picket signs in the trunk. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we were accustomed to doing pickets and rallies all over the world, as a matter of fact. We've been many places and all over the country. And we would pass down the street because they have so many protests in Washington. We never know whether they're pro or con with us. So we would drive by and we'd see people picketing, protesting about something, and we weren't sure because their signs didn't indicate that. So we'd park, get out of the car, go over and say, what are you picketing for? And usually it was something about human rights, civil rights, women's rights, or something about peace, anti-war, or about health. So we'd go over and we'd say, what are you picketing for? And they would tell us. We'd just say, okay, just a minute, we'll be right back. We'd go to the car and get a sign out of the trunk that matched whatever their cause was, come back and picket with them.
Oh.
And then, of course, we were invited to many rallies and times when people were picketing, and we were always happy to participate. And we were such close friends that if he went to a rally, they would ask where I was. If I went to a rally and he wasn't there, they would ask where he was, because they were so accustomed to our picketing together and speaking for these rallies.
Okay. In that time, they also had things going on like Hosea Feed the Hungry and a lot of things in the community. And you said that you stayed in Atlanta at one point in time. Were you involved in any of those type of...
Well, of course. Julian Bond was here at that time. We were very good friends. Reverend Howard Creasy, Billy McKinney. I had so many good friends here, so I always went to the Hungry Club because we knew something special was going to be going on there. We were going to learn about an issue in which we needed to be involved. We were going to learn something when we went there. There were going to be special speakers there who were going to tell us things we needed to know. So I made it a point to attend those events. And of course, Mr. Gregory was a great admirer of Faye Williams. I mentioned him in a documentary that Mr. Gregory, that was just done about Mr. Gregory, called The One and Only Dick Gregory. And one of the things Mr. Gregory told me about was his getting a lot of money at one time, and knowing that his family needed it, but he figured they could make it, some other way, and he thought the movement was bigger than just his family or just himself. So he gave that money away to Hosea because he admired him so much for what he was doing in the movement.
Actually, how did you, when was the first time, how did you meet Dick Gregory?
Well, I was running for the United States Congress in my home state of Louisiana right after I finished law school. And Mr. Gregory had a daughter at Louisiana State University. And Congressman Dimely from California, who was a good friend with Mr. Gregory, invited him to come over to my campaign banquet one evening. And I was continuing to say, my mother taught me this, and my mother taught me that, and my mother taught me the other. And when I finished talking, Mr. Gregory was called on to come and give a few remarks. For him, there's no such thing as a few remarks.
Right.
He talked until he was finished, no matter what was going on. So he came up to the stage after me, and he said, I kept hearing you talk about all the things your mother taught me. He said, I had to meet your mother because my children don't listen to me. The only way I get to talk to them is I pull my chair up in front of the refrigerator, and that's how I get a chance to talk to them. But otherwise, they just don't listen. So I thought that's a novel way of doing it. And then when he went back to Washington, where he generally lived, although he had a home in Massachusetts, but he was in Washington a lot simply because of all the things going on there, and it was kind of a takeoff point for him to go many different places. Every day he was speaking to somebody, some university or church or some black banquet or convention or what have you. And so he had a place in Washington, D.C. And one night he called me from Baltimore, where he had just done a show, and asked me to come and get him on a Friday evening when the traffic is worse than ever. And I'm like, he doesn't know me that well, that he doesn't know that I don't like to drive in all this traffic.
Right.
But he was so charming that I went and picked him up anyway. And when I got there, he wasn't ready as usual. Time meant nothing to him. He would take his time. He didn't care if you waited or what have you. But I went in and I helped him pack his things. And when I say help him pack, he would always carry 8, 10, 12 bags on the shoulder, on the arm, rolling one every way that he could carry them. So that is how I got to know him. But I got to know him even better after I dropped him off that night. He started bringing friends over to my place to show them how to cook veggie burgers. Now, his family is surprised to know that he knew how to cook anything, but he showed me how to cook, and he would pass them out to his friends. And the point he wanted to make to them is that it's the seasoning that matters. It doesn't matter what it is you're seasoning, but it's going to taste good or bad depending upon the seasoning that's in it.
How you season,
So
what
now,
is your cooking?
Another surprise to his family, he taught me how to wash dishes. He said, okay, you go over to the sink and you run the water on your plate or whatever and your dishes, and then you put it in some hot water in the sink with Clorox in it, so you can get all the germs off it, and then you put it in the washing machine, the dishwashing machine. And I'm like, well, what is the dishwasher for? It seems like they're clean already. But that is the way he taught me how to wash dishes. Now, I don't do it always, just once in a while. I follow his instructions on that. But those were our first basic things that we did together. And then after that, we began making all the rallies and protests and all together. And reading. The other thing, he was a big reader. So I would go shopping with him to buy books. And he always bought 2. Now, there was a method to his madness. If he bought 2 books, he could leave one at my house and one at his. So even if he's in Spain or Atlanta or wherever, he could call me and say, hey, baby, look on page 63 and tell me what that quote says. He wanted to quote something exactly. So that is what happened with
books.
my books. And you should see how many books I have in my house as a result of it.
Books are awesome now.